Fort Liberty, North Carolina, was home to the most elite soldiers in the United States military. Within its sprawling grounds lay a compound that did not appear on any public map. The men who trained there were ghosts, Delta Force operators who moved through the world's most dangerous places without leaving a trace. They were the best of the best. And they knew it. On a humid morning in late August, a silver sedan pulled up to the security checkpoint outside the compound. The guard studied the driver's credentials with careful attention. The woman behind the wheel was in her late 40s, with short auburn hair and calm hazel eyes. She wore simple civilian clothes, khaki pants, a white blouse, and sensible shoes. Her ID card identified her as Diana Cole, Department of Defense consultant. "Ma'am, you're cleared to proceed to Building 7, the guard said, handing back her credentials. "Someone will meet you there." Diana nodded and drove through the gate. Building 7 was a low concrete structure at the far end of the compound. It housed classrooms and briefing rooms used for advanced training. Diana parked her car and walked to the entrance, carrying a leather messenger bag over her shoulder. Inside, she found a reception area manned by a young sergeant. He looked at her with barely concealed curiosity. "Ms. Cole?" "That's right. Colonel Harrison asked me to show you to the briefing room. The team is already assembled." Diana followed him down a long hallway. The walls were lined with photographs of past operations, faces blurred, locations redacted, but the message was clear. This was a place where serious work was done. The sergeant stopped at a heavy door and pushed it open. "Ma'am, this is Training Room 4. Diana stepped inside. The room was arranged like a small auditorium, with tiered seating facing a podium and projection screen. Approximately 20 men sat scattered across the seats. They were all in their 30s and 40s, with the hard eyes and confident postures of career warriors. These were the operators, the men who had seen combat in every corner of the world. They turned to look at Diana as she entered. Their expressions ranged from indifference to open skepticism. At the front of the room stood a tall man with a shaved head and a thick scar running down the left side of his face. He wore the insignia of a master sergeant. His name tag read Brooks. "You must be the consultant," he said. His voice was flat, unimpressed. "Diana Cole. I'll be conducting your briefings for the next 2 weeks." Brooks crossed his arms. "Briefings on what, exactly?" "Advanced interrogation resistance. Psychological operations. Counterintelligence protocols." A ripple of amusement passed through the room. One of the operators, a muscular man with a beard, leaned back in his chair and laughed. "No offense, ma'am, but we've been doing this job for a long time. I'm not sure what a civilian consultant is going to teach us." Diana set her bag on the podium and looked at him steadily. "What's your name?" "Staff Sergeant Reeves." "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I understand your skepticism. You've trained for years. You've operated in environments I can't publicly discuss. You've earned your place here." Reeves nodded, looking satisfied. "But I've been asked to conduct this training because there are gaps in your preparation. Gaps that have cost lives in the past. My job is to help close those gaps." Master Sergeant Brooks stepped forward. His expression was hard. "With all due respect, Ms. Cole, you don't know anything about our operations. You don't know what we've been through. You're a civilian. You sit in an office somewhere and write reports. We go out there and do the real work." Diana did not flinch. "I understand how you feel, Master Sergeant." "I don't think you do." Brooks looked around at his men, then back at Diana. "Look, I'm sure you're very qualified in your field. But this isn't a corporate boardroom. This is Delta Force. We don't need someone who's never been in combat telling us how to do our jobs." The room murmured in agreement. Diana opened her bag and removed a thick folder. "These are my training materials. We'll begin with—" "We won't begin with anything," Brooks interrupted. I'm going to call Colonel Harrison and recommend that this training be cancelled. We have real work to do, and we don't have time for this. He turned and walked toward the door. Diana's voice stopped him. Master Sergeant Brooks. He paused but did not turn around. I was told to expect resistance. I was told that Delta operators don't accept outsiders easily. I respect that. But I was also told to complete this training, regardless of your objections. Brooks turned slowly. His eyes were cold. Lady, I don't care what you were told. You don't belong here. And until someone proves otherwise, that's exactly how we're going to treat you. He walked out of the room. Several of the operators followed him. Diana stood alone at the podium, facing the remaining men. They watched her with expressions of pity and contempt. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. But that did not make it any easier. The next 3 days were the longest of Diana's professional life. Master Sergeant Brooks had made his position clear to everyone in the compound. Diana Cole was an outsider, a bureaucrat, a civilian pretending to understand things she had never experienced. She was to be tolerated but not respected. The operators followed his lead. When Diana entered the dining facility, conversation stopped. Men she tried to greet looked through her as if she were invisible. When she attempted to conduct her scheduled briefings, only a handful of soldiers showed up, and they spent the entire time on their phones or staring at the ceiling. Staff Sergeant Reeves was particularly cruel. He made comments just loud enough for Diana to hear. Another day of babysitting the consultant. I wonder how much they're paying her to waste our time. Probably never fired a weapon in her life. Diana absorbed every insult without reaction. She continued to show up. She continued to prepare her materials. She continued to offer training that no one wanted to receive. On the 4th day, things escalated. Diana arrived at training room 4 to find the door locked. She knocked several times, but no one answered. Through the small window, she could see the operators inside, laughing and talking among themselves. Brooks saw her looking through the window. He smiled and waved, then deliberately turned his back. Diana stood in the hallway for a full minute, her jaw tight. Then she walked away. She found an empty office and sat down at the desk. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back her anger. She had faced far worse than this in her career. She had endured things these men could not imagine. But that did not make their contempt any less painful. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unlisted number. Hold the line. Help is coming. Diana stared at the message for a long moment. She did not recognize the number. But she recognized the phrase. It was something her old commander used to say, decades ago, in a different life. She put the phone away and took a deep breath. That afternoon, Diana was summoned to the base commander's office. Colonel Marcus Harrison was a lean man in his 50s, with gray hair and a deeply lined face. He had been commanding special operations units for 20 years. Ms. Cole, please have a seat. Diana sat across from his desk. The office was sparse, decorated only with military awards and a single photograph of Harrison with his family. I've heard there have been some difficulties with your training program, Harrison said carefully. That's an understatement, sir. Harrison sighed. Master Sergeant Brooks is one of my best operators. He's been with Delta for 15 years. He's seen more combat than most soldiers see in 3 careers. But he can be resistant to outside input. He's been more than resistant, Colonel. He's actively sabotaging my mission. Harrison nodded slowly. I understand. And I want you to know that I did not invite you here. This training was mandated by people well above my pay grade. I was simply told to accommodate you. Diana studied his face. You don't think I belong here either. Harrison hesitated. I think you're clearly intelligent and professional. But I also think that certain things can only be taught by people who have lived them. These men have seen the worst of humanity. They've made impossible choices under impossible conditions. They have a hard time respecting someone who hasn't shared those experiences. And you assume I haven't. Your file says you're a DoD consultant with a background in psychology. You have advanced degrees. You've written papers on interrogation techniques. But there's nothing in your file about military service. Diana was silent for a moment. Colonel, what if I told you that my file doesn't contain everything? Harrison raised an eyebrow. I'd say that every personnel file is incomplete in some way. But the essential facts are usually accurate. And what if the essential facts were classified at a level you don't have access to? The colonel leaned back in his chair. Ms. Cole, I have a top-secret clearance with compartmented access. There's very little I can't see. There's a great deal you can't see, Colonel. Trust me on that. Harrison looked at her for a long moment. Something in her eyes made him uncomfortable, a depth that he could not quite read. Even if that were true, he said slowly, it doesn't change the immediate problem. My men don't respect you. They won't listen to you. And I can't force them to change their minds. I'm not asking you to force anything. I'm asking you to give me more time. How much time? 1 week. If things haven't changed by then, I'll leave voluntarily. Harrison considered this. 1 week. But I can't promise my men will cooperate. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance. The colonel nodded slowly. All right, Ms. Cole. 1 week. Part 3, The Incident. The next morning, Diana arrived at the compound before dawn. She had not slept well, her mind turning over the problem like a puzzle with missing pieces. She knew why the operators dismissed her. She understood their world. She had lived in it for longer than most of them had been serving. But she could not tell them that. Her past was locked behind walls of classification that could not be breached, not without authorization from people far above Fort Liberty. She made her way to the fitness center, hoping to find a quiet place to think. The gym was nearly empty at this hour, just a few early risers lifting weights or running on treadmills. Diana changed into workout clothes and began a series of stretches. Even in civilian life, she maintained the physical conditioning that had saved her life countless times. She did not notice the group of operators entering the gym until they were already surrounding her. There were 5 of them, led by Staff Sergeant Reeves. They wore PT uniforms and smirks. Well, look who's trying to stay in shape, Reeves said. Careful, ma'am. You might pull something. Diana straightened. Good morning, Staff Sergeant. You know, some of the guys were talking. They think you might actually believe you have something to teach us. Reeves stepped closer. But here's the thing. We've been watching you. You move like you've had training. Real training. But you won't say where. Diana said nothing. So either you're lying about your background, or you're hiding something. Reeves crossed his arms. Which is it? My background is not your concern. See, I think it is. Because if you're going to waste our time, the least you can do is be honest about who you are. Diana felt the tension rising. The other operators had formed a loose circle around her. This was not just harassment anymore. This was a test. Let me ask you something, Reeves, Diana said quietly. Have you ever been captured by hostile forces? Reeves blinked. What? Captured. Held prisoner. Interrogated. His face hardened. That's none of your business. It's exactly my business. That's why I'm here. Diana stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think resistance training is a joke. You think psychological operations are for academics. But let me tell you something. The enemy doesn't care how many muscles you have or how fast you can run. When they have you in a room with no windows and no hope, the only thing that will save you is what's in your head. Reeves's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know what it feels like to be beaten for information I couldn't give. I know what it feels like to watch friends die because someone broke under pressure. I know what it sounds like when a grown man begs for death because the pain has become unbearable. The gym was silent. The other operators were staring at Diana with different expressions now, confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been the beginning of doubt. Reeves recovered first. Nice speech. But words are cheap. Anyone can claim they've been through hard times. You're right, Diana said. Words are cheap. So let's try something else. She stepped back and raised her hands in a fighting stance. You want to know if I'm real? Prove it. Right here, right now. Reeves laughed. Lady, I'm not going to fight a civilian. That would be assault. It's not assault if I'm asking for it. Consider it a training exercise. Diana's eyes were steady. Unless you're afraid. The word hung in the air. Reeves's face flushed with anger. Fine. You want to embarrass yourself, be my guest. He moved faster than most people could track, a quick step forward, a hand reaching for Diana's wrist. What happened next was over in 3 seconds. Diana deflected his grip, redirected his momentum, and swept his legs out from under him. Before Reeves could react, he was on his back with Diana's knee on his chest and her forearm across his throat. She leaned down close to his ear. Lesson 1, she whispered. Never underestimate your opponent. She released him and stood up. The other operators were frozen in shock. Reeves scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation. That was luck. You caught me off guard. I've been catching people off guard for 30 years, Diana said calmly. It's kind of my specialty. She picked up her towel and walked out of the gym without looking back. Word spread quickly through the compound. By lunchtime, everyone had heard some version of what happened in the gym. The civilian consultant had taken down Staff Sergeant Reeves in 3 seconds flat. Some said she used some kind of special technique. Others said Reeves had slipped. But everyone agreed on one thing, Diana Cole was not what she appeared to be. Master Sergeant Brooks heard the news with a mixture of anger and confusion. He had built his entire approach to Diana around the assumption that she was a soft civilian playing soldier. Now that assumption was crumbling. He found Diana in training room 4, alone, reviewing her materials. We need to talk, he said. Diana looked up. I'm listening. Brooks closed the door behind him. What happened in the gym this morning? That wasn't normal civilian training. That was combat technique. Advanced level. Yes, it was. So who are you? Really? Diana set down her papers. That's a complicated question, Master Sergeant. I've got time. Diana studied his face. The hostility was still there, but underneath it was something else, genuine curiosity. Everything I've told you is true, she said. I am a DoD consultant. I do have advanced degrees in psychology. I have written papers on interrogation techniques. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is classified at a level that neither you nor Colonel Harrison can access. Brooks shook his head. That's convenient. Every time someone asks a hard question, you hide behind classification. I'm not hiding. I'm following orders. Just like you do. Before Brooks could respond, the door burst open. A young lieutenant rushed in, looking flustered. Master Sergeant. There's a helicopter incoming. General Morrison is on board. Brooks's face went pale. General Morrison. The JSOC commander. Yes, Master Sergeant. He'll be on the ground in 10 minutes. Colonel Harrison wants everyone assembled in the main briefing room immediately. The lieutenant hurried away. Brooks looked at Diana with new suspicion. Do you know anything about this? Diana's expression was unreadable. Let's go find out. The main briefing room was packed. Every operator on base had been summoned, along with the support staff and command personnel. The room buzzed with nervous energy. General Thomas Morrison commanded all of Joint Special Operations Command. He did not make unannounced visits unless something significant was happening. Diana stood at the back of the room, watching. Master Sergeant Brooks and his men sat in the front rows, their earlier confidence replaced by tense attention. The side door opened, and General Morrison entered. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with silver hair and a face that had seen decades of command. He walked to the podium with the deliberate stride of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed. Colonel Harrison stood to greet him. General, welcome to. Morrison raised a hand. Sit down, Colonel. This won't take long. Harrison sat. The general surveyed the room, his eyes moving across the assembled operators. When his gaze reached Diana at the back of the room, he paused. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, respect, perhaps even affection. Gentlemen, he began, I'm going to get straight to the point. I've received reports that there have been problems with a training program here. Problems involving disrespect toward a visiting instructor. Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What you don't know, what you couldn't know, is who that instructor really is. Morrison reached into his briefcase and removed a thick folder. This is the classified personnel file of Diana Cole. Or rather, the file of the woman you know as Diana Cole. He opened the folder. Her real name is Lieutenant Colonel Diana Sullivan. She served in Army intelligence for 32 years before transferring to a compartmented unit so secret that even I don't have complete access to her records. The room was utterly silent. During her career, Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan completed over 200 covert operations across 4 continents. She infiltrated hostile organizations, extracted high-value intelligence, and saved countless American lives through actions that will never be publicly acknowledged. Morrison turned a page. In 1998, she was captured during an operation in Eastern Europe. She spent 47 days in enemy custody, subjected to interrogation techniques that most of you could not survive for 47 hours. She gave up nothing. When she was finally rescued, she had 3 broken ribs, a fractured skull, and permanent nerve damage in her left hand. Diana flexed her left hand unconsciously. The old injury still ached on cold days. She received the Intelligence Star, the CIA's equivalent of the Medal of Honor, for that mission. She received it in a closed ceremony with no media, no publicity, no recognition beyond the handful of people who knew what she had done. Morrison looked up at the operators. This woman has forgotten more about resistance, survival, and sacrifice than most of you will ever learn. And you've been treating her like she doesn't belong here. He closed the folder. I came here today because I couldn't stand by while one of the finest officers I've ever known was humiliated by people who should have been honored to learn from her. He turned to Colonel Harrison. Colonel, I expect this situation to be corrected immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan's training program will continue, and every operator on this base will participate with full respect and attention. Is that understood? Harrison stood quickly. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Morrison nodded. Then he turned to the back of the room, where Diana stood alone. Colonel Sullivan. I apologize that this was necessary. Diana stepped forward slowly. Every eye in the room was on her. Thank you, General. But I'd rather earn their respect than have it ordered. Morrison smiled. You already have. They just didn't know it yet. The briefing room emptied slowly. The operators filed out in stunned silence, many of them glancing back at Diana as they passed. Master Sergeant Brooks was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Then he walked out without saying a word. General Morrison approached Diana. They shook hands, a formal gesture, but with genuine warmth beneath it. It's been a long time, Diana. 12 years, sir. Since the ceremony. You should have let me come sooner. I would have. Diana shook her head. I wanted to see if I could do this on my own. Without pulling rank or calling in favors. And I failed. They were never going to accept me without proof. Morrison smiled. You didn't fail. You held the line. That's what you've always done. Diana thought of the text message she had received, hold the line. Help is coming. Now she understood who had sent it. Thank you, sir. For everything. Morrison nodded. What you're teaching these men is important. More important than they know. The next generation of operators needs to understand that strength isn't just physical. The mind is the ultimate weapon. You proved that in ways that most of them can't comprehend. He glanced at his watch. I need to get back to Washington. But I wanted to see your face when those boys realized who they were dealing with. Diana laughed softly. It was satisfying, I'll admit. Enjoy it. You've earned it. Morrison departed, leaving Diana alone in the empty briefing room. The next morning, Diana arrived at training room 4 expecting to find it empty again. Instead, she found every seat occupied. All 20 operators were present, sitting straight and attentive. Master Sergeant Brooks stood at the back of the room, his arms at his sides. Diana walked to the podium and looked out at the faces before her. The contempt was gone. In its place was something new, respect, curiosity, perhaps even a hint of shame. Good morning, she said. Good morning, ma'am, they responded in unison. Diana opened her folder. Yesterday, you learned something about my background. I want to be clear about something. I didn't ask for that information to be shared. I didn't want to pull rank or use my past as a shield. She paused. But now that you know, I hope you understand why I'm here. Everything I'm going to teach you, I learned the hard way. In cold rooms with no windows. In situations where the only thing standing between me and a broken mind was the training I had received. She looked at Staff Sergeant Reeves, who met her gaze without flinching. I'm not here to prove I'm better than you. I'm here to make you better. Stronger. More resilient. Because someday, one of you might find yourself in the situation I was in. And when that day comes, I want you to survive. The room was silent. Brooks stepped forward. His face was difficult to read. Ma'am. Lieutenant Colonel. He cleared his throat. On behalf of the unit, I want to apologize. We treated you badly. We made assumptions. We were wrong. Diana nodded. Apology accepted, Master Sergeant. If it's all right with you, we'd like to start over. Learn what you came here to teach us. Diana smiled, a real smile, the first one in weeks. Then let's begin. Over the next 2 weeks, Diana conducted the most intensive training program the unit had ever experienced. She taught them techniques for resisting interrogation, maintaining mental clarity under extreme stress, and recognizing psychological manipulation. She shared stories from her own experiences, carefully edited to protect classified details, that illustrated the real-world consequences of the skills she was teaching. The operators listened. They learned. They practiced. And slowly, something changed. The men who had dismissed her as a civilian began to seek her out for advice. They asked questions about her career, her experiences, her thoughts on leadership and sacrifice. Staff Sergeant Reeves became one of her most dedicated students, approaching every exercise with focus and humility. Master Sergeant Brooks remained more reserved, but Diana noticed him watching her with a different expression now. Respect, certainly. But also something that might have been admiration. On the final day of training, the unit gathered for a closing ceremony. Colonel Harrison presented Diana with a certificate of appreciation, a standard gesture, but meaningful nonetheless. Then Brooks stepped forward. "Ma'am, the unit wanted to give you something." He handed her a small wooden box. Diana opened it to find a Delta Force Challenge coin, the kind given only to operators and a select few outsiders who had earned the unit's respect. "You're one of us now," Brooks said. "Whether you like it or not." Diana held the coin tightly. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I'm honored, Master Sergeant. More than you know." That evening, Diana packed her bags and prepared to leave Fort Liberty. Her work here was done. There would be other assignments, other challenges, other skeptics to convince. But she would carry this experience with her. The humiliation, the doubt, the eventual triumph. It was all part of the journey. As she walked to her car, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Brooks approaching. "Ma'am. One more thing." "What is it?" Brooks hesitated. "When I first met you, I thought you were a fraud. I thought you were wasting our time. I was wrong about you. And I want you to know that I don't make that mistake often." Diana smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." Brooks extended his hand. "If you ever need anything, Lieutenant Colonel, anything at all, you let me know. Delta takes care of its own." Diana shook his hand firmly. "I'll remember that, Master Sergeant." She got in her car and drove away from the compound. In her rearview mirror, she could see Brooks still standing at the gate, watching her go. The sun was setting over Fort Liberty, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Diana rolled down her window and let the warm air wash over her. She had spent 32 years in the shadows, fighting battles that no one would ever know about. She had sacrificed her youth, her health, and countless relationships in service to her country. But moments like this made it all worthwhile. The respect of warriors. The knowledge that she had made a difference. The quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Sullivan, formerly known as Diana Cole, DoD consultant, smiled to herself and drove on into the sunset. Some battles are won with weapons. Others are won with patience, persistence, and the unshakable knowledge of who you really are. This had been one of those battles. And she had won.